Hello and welcome to the Kemetic How-To Guide for Egyptian Pagan and Kemetic practitioners. I'm your host, Sharon. I want to broach the subject of ritual purity because this is something that, for Kemetic reconstructionists in particular, is a very big issue. And maybe I'm a little bit of a rebel on this one, but I think, I want to put a different spin on the whole discussion. And let me warn you guys right now, if you're watching and you're eating something or you're about to fix yourself something, put it down for right now because I've got some stuff to tell you that's interesting, but might make you a little queasy. So here we go. All right. One of the biggest taboos that gets raised in Kemetic reconstructionism and the idea of purity is taboo substances like blood, especially menstruation. The thing is, we've got very interesting evidence to go either way. The Egyptians, their word for natron, the salt, is hesmen, and that also was a euphemism for menstruation. So, the purity and purification, seem to be associated with that. We also have a letter from a lady in Kahun village during the Middle Kingdom, and she was writing in to explain that she wasn't able to produce her quota of weaving because she had to go to the temple for her purification for the month. And so that raises kind of an interesting question. Was she going into the temple to purify herself because she was menstruating? Was it considered a special time? We don't know. And the funny thing is, I have read Egyptologists argue both ways. There are those who said, well, menstruation was taboo. Women, weren't allowed to officiate then. But there are others who said, well, they didn't have the same hang-ups about it as we do. And one of the other things that I think it kind of adds a new dimension to the argument is a very popular amulet. And let me try to show you a picture of it here. Okay. This is generally called the Isis knot, or the Tiet amulet. As you can see, this one is carved from red stone. And the Book of the Dead spell that describes it, says to be set over a Tiet knot of red jasper. So the color was important. And the spell says something about, let me see if I can find it here. You have your blood, O Isis. You have your power, O Isis. You have your magic, O Isis, to be set over this here. Now, we do know from reading Egyptian medical texts, and there it is one more time, the Egyptians did have the equivalent of tampons. So some people have thought, well, what if that's a tampon? I don't know. It could have been a couple of things. They also had a lot of gynecological remedies that were applied. They would take the herbal medicine and they would soak it in a tampon and apply it that way. And some of the things that it was used to treat were hemorrhaging with women who were pregnant or, who were still bleeding after having given birth. And considering that Isis is a mother goddess, it may have something to do with that. Then again, it might have to do with, there's another reference to her swabbing blood from the eye of Horus. So the thing is, this was a knot that was used for protection. So the blood, of course, and then again, there are also people who think that it's not a fold of linen, but actually a stylized representation of female private parts. I don't know. So either way, it raises enough question that I hesitate to come down and say, menstruation was bad. You shouldn't, practice or anything if you're menstruating. They might have understood it in a different way than we do. Another thing that I think we need to keep in mind too is ritual purity. Of course, the priests, they would go and they would wash themselves, at the sacred lake before they would, perform their priestly duties. The Egyptians were very clean people. As a matter of fact, the Greeks, when they came in, they thought it was scandalous. The Egyptians bathed several times a day. The Greeks didn't do that. And the Egyptians thought the Greeks were pretty dirty people. So, especially because they didn't shave and they wore wool and things like that. So, I think cleanliness has a lot to do with it. And especially if you read the Book of the Dead, there's lots of references to, my hinder parts are clean and, things like that. So I think, some of it may have just, had to do with being clean, period, which it makes sense. Um, and there are several spells that say, my abomination is excrement, my abomination is feces. They didn't understand disease the way we do today, but they did know that, these were nasty things you don't want to have to do with. But if you think, let's consider what it was like to live in ancient Egypt for a little while. Um, for one, unless you were very well off, you lived on a dirt floor. And you had animals coming in and out because you had the family pets. If you were a farmer, you had your hut, and then you had the animals that probably didn't live too far away. So there's, lots of animals doing what they do, and that gets tracked in, you know, and you can't sweep it out if the floor is made of dirt. Where's it going to go? Another thing that is rather interesting, we know from villages that have been excavated. Some families, if there was an infant that died, and they had a very high infant mortality rate, if an infant died, they sometimes would bury the child in the back part of the house, because they've found the burials, and that's something, we don't bury a body in the backyard, unless, you just killed them and you don't want to get caught, that's their health code's against doing that. But they didn't understand that. They also didn't understand that a lot of diseases, come from not washing your hands, and we have proof that this affected all the different classes. A very enlightening book that, if you get a chance to get it, it's lots of fun. Okay, yeah, this was the cover. Okay, it's Conversations with Mummies by Dr. Rosalie David. She is a doctor, professor of Egyptology. She works in Manchester, in England, and her big project is a forensic examination of mummies. They're actually building things like a DNA bank of mummies, and they're using the mummies to study modern diseases. Malaria is one, and of course, if you watched any of the stuff that was on TV not too long ago, we recently discovered that King Tut had malaria. But there's another disease that's very common to that part of the world, and the names for it are very long, but there's bilharziasis is one word, but the other one is schistosomiasis. I'll put those down at the bottom, so if you want to wiki them, you can find them. It's carried, there are these little parasites that are carried by snails, and she talks about it here. And you got a gorgeous landscape shot there. Well, what would happen is if you were swimming or wading in a canal, walking, through marshy areas, and if you think about, where most of these people lived, they would be doing that at some point. The parasite would come in through, a break in your skin, your leg or, your foot or whatever, and it wasn't fatal, but it would lodge itself in places like your bladder or your intestines, and could be very painful. You'd get these cysts, and you'd pass blood through your stool or your urine. And a lot of people apparently lived with this condition because they've tracked a lot of mummies that have it, and these were people who were fairly wealthy, and some of them served as priests and priestesses. And there were other diseases that some of them had. There was one priestess who had a disease caused by cysts that are caused by a parasite that's picked up in animal feces. And probably, she might have been cleaning or something in her house or, whatever. Didn't know you wash your hands in order to get rid of germs. And that's where she picked it up. And this was a temple singer. So if you think about it, okay, and this probably wasn't what killed her, but she had it for a long time. So if you think about it, you have these people, we've got this vision of Egyptian priests, with they're pure and they have their shaved heads and they go in and they're, chanting and doing all this, and it's this perfect, and mysterious state. Well, they were people, and some of them were pretty sick, when they weren't on their rotation, or when they were in between, the morning, midday, and evening services, they could have been pretty sick. They might have been in the back, having to deal with, some pretty uncomfortable issues. So, and we get sick today. We probably get more colds and, things like that than they did. But I think it evens out, in the long term. So when we discuss ritual purity, keep in mind the conditions that we live in here are pretty clean. The Egyptians would have really dug being able to have, a tile or hardwood floor and, be able to have running water and, get rid of waste, without, having to go trek out into the desert, and, uh, you know, do your thing in the sand. Um, so when it comes to ritual purity, I think what's more important than physical issues, and are you sick or are you menstruating or whatever, you know, um, do you feel right for it? It's more about mental and spiritual purity, I think. If you're clean, you've cleansed yourself of negativity, and you're, trying to elevate your mind to, a higher state. That's more important than, adhering to strict uh, dogmatic guidelines. I mean, think about it. If we wanted to, participate in a religion that was that hung up about, dogma, I'd, um, probably be, saying my rosary for my poor brother who beats off to, internet porn. I mean, come on. Um, it really shouldn't be solely about the taboos. That's my 2 cents on it. Hopefully, this will help you, you know, uh, make a more informed decision, for yourself. So for the Kemetic How-To Guide, this is Sharon, wishing you some MT.